Welcome to The Difference Makers, a Paladin Security podcast. We'll take you inside the world of security and share firsthand expertise from our industry professionals. Join us as we dive into everything security and explore the journeys of those who go above and beyond to make our world a safer and friendlier place.
Welcome to The Difference Makers. I'm Christina Hidanis. We're going in a bit of a different direction today and hearing from someone who has deep roots in the security industry and is a client of Paladin Security. Kelvin Ng is Director of Business Operations for Global Relay and has over 30 years' experience in executive management and project leadership. But before that, he started his career in security. Today, Kelvin shares nuggets from his career, discusses the evolution of the security industry, and shares what clients are looking for in a security provider. Here is Kelvin Ng. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Kelvin. It's great to have you in our Paladin offices.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we appreciate you coming in. I want to talk about your current role. You're currently the Director of Business Operations for Global Relay. So first off, tell me a bit about what Global Relay does and your role with them.
Sure. Basically, Global Relay is a technology company. It's privately held and was founded in Vancouver. At this stage, we have about 1,600 employees and about 10 offices globally.
Mm-hmm.
Half of that staff resides in the Vancouver office, so it remains our largest and headquarters facility.
Mm-hmm.
Global Relay is basically a technology company, and what we do is we provide services to facilitate and to support the regulatory compliance. In a nutshell, compliance is a world where regulators or government authorities are engaged in oversight of how industries and sectors conduct themselves.
Right.
We specialize a lot in finance. So an example of that is there are companies that are involved in trading. And by companies, it could also involve major banks. If they have a division that is involved in the exchange of securities, the purchase of securities, the government and the compliance offices want to ensure that there are no acts of fraud occurring, that nobody is getting cheated. So it is really to protect the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Global Relay captures electronic messages so that we can reproduce data sets for future investigations, audits, and lawsuits if there's a dispute about how business was conducted.
Well, it sounds so interesting that, you can do all that just, that can all just be available for, if they're under compliance, like you said. I can imagine you have so many stories related to your work with them. Now, I do want to touch on, security. Of over 30 years of experience in executive management, project leadership globally, like you just kind of discussed there. And that includes a long history related to security. So I want to start there. How did you get started in security?
Oh, my goodness. Believe it or not, it started as a part-time summer job when I was going to university.
Wow.
And I worked for a firm. It was the largest in Vancouver at the time. It was called Executive Security back in the 70s. At any rate, that's how I started.
Okay.
And I was embarking on a path to get into the medical profession.
Same.
But I was assigned to quite a number of very interesting sites. And I won't name names, but I was placed into an organization which was quite, it was large. It was operated by an American gentleman residing in Canada.
Okay.
And it was a long-established firm. So being in their offices exposed me to a great deal of business activity. And they were engaged in the acquisition of a major British Columbian organization. That was all done under great confidentiality and secrecy while the conversations were going on. So I saw the intersection of business and security, and I found it fascinating to the extent that I changed my career path.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, I think security can open a lot of doors. It's a growing sector, and without spending an hour talking about that was the beginning of my decision to pivot. And so in my studies, I went from a curriculum in the sciences over to criminology, and that's where I got my degree at Simon Fraser University. And through all of that, it just went alongside the work I was doing more and more on a part-time basis as I was studying, but I always stayed engaged. And when I finished, I was promoted through the ranks of the security firm.
Wow.
The next major event that occurred that changed the direction of where I was going was I got involved with the American Society for Industrial Security in the course of my security career. And I was one of the founding charter members of the Canadian Pacific chapter locally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then went on to become their secretary, vice chair, and their chairman.
Yeah.
Towards the end of that period, I was also invited to join one of the councils at ASIS or ASIS. I think people call it.
People say
both.
different ways,
Yes.
yeah.
And that was called the Council on, they used to be called committees, now they're councils, but it was the Privacy and Personnel Information Management Committee. And that brought me into contact with some of the most senior security people from some of the largest firms globally. Yeah. So my fellow committee members were from Lockheed Martin, Westinghouse, the Kimberly-Clark, Skandia Insurance out of Sweden. So that in itself was another learning experience. But once again, it tied my interest in business and security together in a very nice way. None of these could have been foreseen. Yeah. And so through the course of that, I made, I was able to network very efficiently and effectively. And long story short is that I also became the chair of that committee.
Wow.
And the year that I was going to step down was when 9/11 actually happened. And so I was asked to stay on in the chairman's position just to avoid confusion and complexities. And that committee, and it became known as a council by that time, played a very, very pivotal role in assisting the development of policies with respect to the no-fly lists, the Patriot Act, because privacy and personnel information management really boils down to providing guidance and advice on how to balance personal privacy rights and constitutional rights versus the right of organizations to access that personal information to protect others and organizations. It really was one of the guiding principles in the development of a lot of the security protocols that exist to this day. Wow. And so that also brought me into a whole new world of exposure, as well as the development of relationships with people at very senior levels throughout. And that included senior government representatives and agency representatives of the time. Right. So these things were all, I guess these were the three major life-changing points that has guided my career. And then with all of that in the background, I just used both the contacts as well as the learning experiences to carry me through what became more of a business management direction the last 20 plus years now.
Well, I was going to say, it's so...
That's a mouthful.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
No, that's great. There's so much information there. And that's one thing that I can tell from you is that you're so passionate about it, and that you seem to take all your experiences head on and tackle them as they come. Like, what has that taught you? Have you always kind of been that type of person, or has it kind of opened your doors to the way you lead and work and go about your life?
Absolutely, yes. What I believe, the most important thing I can say in response to that is my approach and attitude and philosophy are all based on the people I've met along the way who I view as being my mentors. I've learned that it's very important to create strong relationships, to build a sense of trust in those relationships, and to display loyalty to those who you have relied upon and those you count as friends.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the simplest answer. It is, building strong bonds and approaching things with a simple philosophy that you owe a lot to people who have helped you along the way. And I try to convey the same. I mean, I come from an immigrant family. My parents brought me to Canada when I was 5 years old. And they worked very, very hard to create a good life for myself and my siblings. And we've all done very well. But you never forget what gets you there. And so I guess that's the other component, right? That family experience. And so these days, you'll identify with this. There's a lot of immigrants in the security sector and getting their start in Canada, in the States, with a security job.
Yeah.
And I always try to be cognizant and respectful of what these people are doing, because anybody who's trying to get a new start anywhere, right, is working hard.
Yeah, it's tough.
And they have obstacles and hurdles that they have to overcome and get past. So that's never lost on me either. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It's such a good point to bring up about, like, being empathetic and thinking about somebody else's situation, and then being grateful for the people that kind of helped you get to where you are today. So no, I think that's a great point. I do want to touch on, from the time you started in security and to now, you have no doubt seen the security industry evolve. What would you say that has looked like? Kind of walk me through the evolution that you have seen.
Oh my.
I guess the main points.
You ask all the loaded questions.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's just hard to try to keep it contained, but I'm trying to cover as much ground as I can.
Well, no, you just have so much experience. So it's, it's great. I mean, you can just give us your maybe top 4 points or top 3 points, like whatever you think is.
Well, the changes are very dramatic. Firstly, I've seen the security industry really evolve. In the early days, it was still very much providing a uniformed presence, a night watchman styled service, or a concierge styled service, in public spaces, checking things in, is basic access control. And over time, it has, like so many other sectors that have succeeded, it's had to evolve very dramatically. And today, I mean, there's so much technology that is part of everything from basic patrols to surveillance and access. Back then, it was simple, turn the key, go shake some doors, make sure they're still locked.
Yeah.
Now we rely very heavily on the support and the assistance of hardware and software and sophisticated camera systems, but which are also operated by software. And so that's one major change. And it brings more accountability, I think, throughout across the entire spectrum. The other is the workforce has gone through a number of cycles as well. When I started, what was characteristic of it was much younger people. Looking for a start, and it was great training ground to develop both soft skills and hard skills. It was also young people who wanted to get into policing or some element of law enforcement. I'm sure that still exists, but it's been diluted, and I think that's part of the economics of the labor market and the rest. So I know that it'll change again, right, as conditions in our economy change. And I hope to see a return to those who really come into this business with the objective of a career. And I hope that organizations like Paladin and other leaders in this space will provide those opportunities. But it comes down to the customer and the employer as well, right? I've seen it go through a number of cycles as well on that front, because, as I mentioned, in the early days, there was this, I need a night watchman. I need to make sure my construction yard is secure. And it evolved to a place where security became a critical component of an organization's operations. The requirement for reputational success meant you couldn't afford to allow things to go wrong. And so there was a much greater sensitivity for a higher level of security. That persists to this day. But again, economics plays a part. And so I see a lot of people say, I need this just to satisfy insurance requirements, versus those who say, I really want good security. And I know it's very difficult to strike the right balance. At Global Relay, we've gone the latter route, and in part because of my past. I recognize the value of a good, solid security. And so in my discussions in securing our services, it took me a long time to find Paladin. I actually went through a number of companies. I relied on friends and colleagues from my past and their recommendations. And this is how I've ended at Paladin the last 15 years almost as a customer.
Yeah.
And I bring that up to make the point that if you want good security, you must pay for it. You must ensure stability in your guard force. And there are tremendous pressures to reduce costs, generate best price, right, for the old adage, you get what you pay for, is true if you find the right company to deliver that, right? Some companies will sell that message, but not deliver.
Right.
So it requires some due diligence, but it does come down to that too. And so again, there's been ups and downs on that front, but overall, it's moving in a good direction. I think we have elevated wages for those in the sector, and so that reflects an understanding and appreciation of the realities of what security is all about these days. Right? It gets tougher. You need better people. You need better equipment, and you need a company that really drives home that message, but also invests in their people and in their ability to deliver services. So I think those are three key areas I've seen change in evolution. And obviously the threat has changed too.
Right.
And we see it in the news every day of what's going on. And there's threats and risks that also have become more complex. We have social issues that are now attached to it.
Yeah.
And the training of people who engage in the reaction and handling of those situations requires much more experience, education, and training. And so that has been elevated. I see it. But so as I say, I see it all moving in a good direction, but there are definitely bumps along the way.
Right.
Too.
Like anything.
Yes.
Now you touched on Paladin being a Global Relay being a client of Paladin. Now we, like you said, you have that expertise from the security industry to kind of know what you're looking for, what you want in a security provider for Global Relay. What do clients look for in a security provider, or what are their needs that you think from a client perspective?
The first thing I look for is leadership, gauging the leadership to ensure that they have a commitment, not just to their customer, but to the well-being of their employees. Everybody will promise you the world, and everybody puts their best foot forward when they are pitching a service or a product. And you got to kind of lift the hood and take a closer look. And that's why I said it took me a while in my selection. I don't think there's anything more I can add other than to say, look after, make sure your supplier is looking after its people. Yeah. Make sure it's got a solid leadership team that lives up to what they promise. And good leaders come from organizations, or good leaders flock to good organizations that are stable. Right? So this stuff all goes hand in hand from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier about some people just want like low cost. It all comes down to cost and that type of thing. But what do you think is like the number one thing that some businesses miss when they're looking for a security provider? Like, do they just sometimes rely on the cost being low and that's it? Like, what would you say would be the number one thing that you would see?
It's a great question, because I think it's not a simple answer. There are always going to be customers who simply need to have some coverage, some eyes and ears, who will react, respond, call the police, do it. And then there are those on the other extreme or the other end of the spectrum who want real security, right? And that means a professional service all around, which means people who can come to you and say, hey, we see this, we recommend making it better by deploying these things. And I get that from Paladin. You have to be there, stay connected with the customer. And that's what I look for as a customer. Are you proactive? Are you leaders in your own field? And you can bring me state-of-the-art solutions, or at least new ideas and concepts, because you invest in your people to go to conferences, to go to seminars, to look for best-in-class and best in breed practices. Right. So as I've always believed in finding out and researching for yourself when looking for any service provider, right? I expect Global Relay's own customers to do that with us. So attached to that is the world of RFPs, right? If I have a large contract to award, typically organizations draft and create a request for proposal, and then they ship it out. And when they get the answers back, they don't validate anything. They just look for the check boxes, right? If the answer includes all the right checks, they go, yep, they're all the same. And now what's the price? Right? That's not smart. And it's not good business. Sure, the check boxes provide you with a template of what to look for. And the answers may not be false, but what do they really mean? You got to drill down, right?
Yeah.
Do you provide this? Yes. Okay. You can't just accept that. It's how do you provide that? That's. I go back to my earlier comment about really doing some research, finding out what are the policies and procedures governing your response in the monitoring station when this type of occurrence arises, right? And can I see a little bit of an anonymized record of things happening, your log sheets?
Yeah.
That will tell me if you take it seriously or you just want that checkbox.
Right.
Security is not a cheap service. Even the cheapest security service is not a cheap service because it's labor, right? It's paying wages. And wages are always like the highest costs for anybody.
Well, it's clear that you have like this passion for the industry and everything that you do. You've made a huge impact throughout your career. I want to wrap it up by asking, what are you most proud of from everything that you've accomplished or what you've learned that you're, proud of that type of thing?
I don't know. I try to stay pretty humble about things because I always bear in mind that it takes a lot of people to make you successful. It doesn't matter where you are, what you do. And that is not a one-time, one-stop deal. You have to continue to nurture relationships. You got to continue to build and grow your a connection with people all the time. And that's a message you have to convey to people as well. In my own job, I tell people, like, my door never closes unless I'm like in a specific conversation with somebody. And I live up to that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kelvin. It was so great to hear your story, a little bit of it. I mean, there's so much more to unpack there, but, time has run out. So,
well, thank you for having me. It's I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christina.
Thanks for listening to The Difference Makers, a Paladin Security podcast. Check out our socials and website at paladinsecurity.com for more episodes.